It started like any ordinary Tuesday. Nothing about that morning hinted at how everything would change. The sky was the same pale gray it always was in early March. The coffee tasted the same. The elevator still stalled between the 9th and 10th floors like it always did. Nothing felt unusual, and maybe that's what makes it worse. Because betrayal doesn't always walk through the front door wearing a warning sign. Sometimes it's polite, smiling, holding the door open for you. He was my boss, Daniel Hayes, Vice President of Operations, the kind of man who made everyone a little more careful with their words when he entered the room. But not because he barked orders or raised his voice. No, it was the opposite. He had this calm, calculated silence about him. The kind that made people wonder what he was thinking. And because no one could tell, everyone worked twice as hard to stay in his good graces. He was good at that power through stillness. I was just a department coordinator, mid-level, invisible to most people unless they needed something from me. But Daniel? He always noticed me. From my first week on the job, he'd remember small details, where I went to school, that I hated sparkling water, that I always used purple ink pens. At first, it felt like kindness. Then it felt like attention. And after a while, it felt loaded. I should have said something when the compliments shifted. When your sharp became your stunning. When you handled that meeting well became you made that meeting worth attending. But it was always subtle. Always just enough to deny if I ever tried to call it out. That Tuesday, he asked me to dinner. His tone was casual. Just a quick bite after work talk through next quarter's planning. I'd stayed late many times before. Dinner didn't seem like a big leap. Besides, he said it in the break room in front of 2 other managers. There was no hidden implication, no private smirk, so I said yes. And that yes is what keeps me up at night. We went to a quiet restaurant 2 blocks from the office. Dim lighting cloth napkins, a waiter who knew him by name. He ordered a bottle of wine before I had the chance to say, I don't usually drink. Just 1 glass, he said, to ease the day off your shoulders. I laughed too politely and accepted it. At first, the conversation stayed professional. Goals, budgets, team performance. I had a notepad. I took real notes. I was trying to keep the atmosphere grounded, anchored to something safe. But with every passing minute, his questions drifted further. Personal. Soft. Are you seeing anyone? Do you ever think about leaving this city? What scares you most about success? I answered carefully. Like walking across glass. He listened in that intense way he always did. Eyes locked, nodding slowly, like every word I spoke carried meaning. Like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. It was intoxicating. And that's what makes it hard to talk about now because a part of me liked it. Liked being seen. Liked being wanted. Even if it was wrong. Even if it made my chest tighten. After dinner, he paid the bill without asking. He stood slowly, buttoned his coat, then looked at me for a moment too long. Come for a walk, he asked. I hesitated, but I followed. We walked past empty storefronts and quiet streetlights, our footsteps echoing off the pavement. He told me about his past, his first job, his failed marriage, his regrets. I told him about my father, how he always made me feel like I wasn't quite enough. We were 2 strangers unpacking our stories under city shadows, pretending they were just stories and not explanations. Then we stopped. He turned to face me, hands in his coat pockets, eyes searching mine. I've never met anyone like you, he said. I looked away. You don't mean that. I do. I felt the air shift. My heart thudded in my throat. You're my boss, I whispered, like saying it aloud would anchor me. I'm just a man, he replied, and I'm standing in front of someone I wish I met 5 years ago. And then He stepped forward. Close. Too close. He didn't touch me, but he didn't need to. The proximity was louder than any contact. I didn't kiss him, but I didn't move away either, and that still haunts me. I replay that moment more than I care to admit, that single breath of space between what was appropriate and what was already too far gone. Me standing frozen on a sidewalk under a flickering street lamp, heart pounding loud enough to drown out logic. Him, so still, so certain, and me, uncertain of everything except the heat in my cheeks and the tremble in my knees. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. And he took that silence as permission. He leaned in slowly, carefully, not in a rush, not aggressive, as if waiting for me to back away, to flinch, to remind him that this wasn't right. But I didn't move. And then his lips brushed mine. Soft, deliberate. Not a kiss exactly, just contact. Just enough to cross the line, just enough to make sure it would never go back to what it was. I stepped back. That much I remember clearly. I can't, I whispered. He didn't look surprised. He didn't apologize. He just nodded like he already knew this would be complicated. Like this was just step one of something he'd been planning for a long time. "I'll walk you to your car," he said gently. I shook my head. "No, I'll be fine." We stood there suspended in the weight of what had just happened. What almost happened until I finally turned and walked away. My legs were shaking. My hands were ice. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too numb for that. That night, I sat in my apartment for hours, still in my work clothes, wine-stained napkin folded in my coat pocket like evidence. I stared at the wall, wondering how a harmless dinner had become a confession, a threat, a temptation. I thought about quitting. I thought about never showing up again. But I didn't. Because real life doesn't give you dramatic exits. It hands you calendars, rent notices, insurance forms, responsibilities. The next morning, I went to work, and when I passed Daniel in the hallway, he greeted me like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said. Just like that. No hesitation, no shift in tone. Like we hadn't shared something dangerous and silent beneath the streetlight. I told myself maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But then came the emails. At first, they were normal project updates, meeting times. Then they became something else. Phrases laced with suggestion. Still thinking about our talk. You have a mind that stays with me. I hope I didn't make things harder the other night. I just couldn't lie to myself anymore. If you ever want to talk, outside the office again, I'd like that. He never signed them with anything more than his name. No emojis, no tone you could pin down. Just words, carefully placed, dangerous in their ambiguity. I didn't respond, but I didn't report him either. And that haunts me just as much, because I wasn't innocent. I let it happen. I didn't draw the line clearly enough. I didn't shut it down. I froze. And when you freeze, people take it as a yes. The hardest part of me didn't want it to stop. Somewhere deep down, I started dividing my days into two lives. There was the version of me who showed up to work, attended meetings, answered emails, wore neutral colors, kept her head down. That version smiled politely when Daniel entered the room, nodded when he spoke, laughed just enough to seem friendly, but not too much to be noticed. Then there was the version that replayed his words at night, the one who wondered what he really meant, the one who kept his emails in a hidden folder, the one who read between the lines of everything he said, looking for clues, reasons, justifications. And between those two selves, I was splitting. I became quieter in meetings, more distracted. I started avoiding eye contact. I left the office as soon as I could, stopped lingering near the break room, stopped taking the stairs, because sometimes he waited for me there. But he was always careful, always professional in public. Nothing overt. No notes, no touching. Just the presence, the looks, the quiet reminders that we shared a secret, that I hadn't said no loud enough. Then one afternoon, he called me into his office. Glass walls, minimalist decor, one framed photo on his desk, his daughter from a previous marriage. He motioned for me to sit. Closed the door. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've seemed distant lately. I want to make sure we're still good." I forced a smile. "Of course, just a lot on my plate." He nodded, eyes scanning mine. "I hope I haven't made things uncomfortable." And there it was, the sentence I'd been waiting for. The opening. I could have said everything right then. I could have laid it all out: the sidewalk, the emails, the way he made me feel like the air had been sucked out of every room we shared. But I didn't, because I was afraid. Afraid of the fallout, of being called dramatic, of being accused of inviting it, afraid of losing the one thing I still had control over: the story. So I said, "It's fine, really," and I hated myself the moment the words left my mouth. He smiled, that slow, knowing smile. "Good," he said, "because I value you, and I'd hate to lose you." He dismissed me with a glance, and I left the office with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how easily I had lied to him, to myself, how quickly I had folded under the pressure of his power. I wasn't just complicit now. I was protective of him, of his image, of the version of the story where I didn't matter enough to cause damage. And that's the part I still haven't forgiven. Not him. Me. Weeks passed. Life didn't implode like I expected it to. That's the strange part: how quietly a wrong thing can settle into your life. How normal it can begin to feel. I stopped checking his emails obsessively. Stopped avoiding him in the halls. It was like we had made some unspoken agreement: we would both pretend nothing had happened, and in doing so, neither of us would have to pay for it. Until the company retreat. It was a 2-day off-site team-building exercises, breakout sessions, scheduled casual bonding. I didn't want to go, but attendance wasn't optional, and my absence would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. The resort was beautiful, secluded, too perfect. And the moment we arrived, I knew I'd made a mistake, because Daniel was already watching me across the lobby from behind the check-in desk, through the crowd of employees and managers. He didn't smile, just a look, one that said, "We're not in the office anymore." That night, we had a group dinner in the main hall. Candlelight, wine again, laughter echoing off high ceilings. I tried to sit at the far end of the table, surrounded by people, but he still found his way into the space near me. Always just close enough to be felt. And when everyone started drifting toward the fire pit for drinks and stories, I lingered behind. I told myself I just wanted fresh air, but I think I was trying to outrun the inevitable. I stood on the edge of the deck, staring out at the trees, when I heard him step up behind me. "You looked like you needed saving," he said, voice low. "I'm fine," I replied, not turning around. "You don't seem fine." I finally looked at him. "You don't get to say that." He paused, caught off guard just for a second. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "That's the problem. You didn't think at all." Silence. And then he said it. "I think about that night all the time." I shook my head. You don't get to do this again. Not here. Not now. I never stopped wanting you, he said, but I can't keep waiting for you to admit you want me too. I stared at him, really stared, and for the first time, I didn't feel flattered. I felt cornered. You don't love me? I said. You love the way I don't say no. You love the power of it. His jaw clenched. I trusted you, I whispered. You were supposed to protect me from this. From you. A beat passed. He stepped back. Not far, but enough. And for once, he didn't have an answer. He walked away, and I stood there alone, heart-pounding breath catching in my throat, not because of what had almost happened, but because I finally realized it never would again. The morning after the retreat, I packed in silence. No group breakfast, no final photos. Just me, a suitcase, and a version of myself I wasn't proud of. I kept my head low, avoided eye contact, slipped out before most people were even awake. I didn't speak to Daniel, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel guilty about that. When I returned to work, something had shifted. Not in the office, not visibly, but inside me. I no longer flinched at the sight of him. I no longer waited for his words to guide my actions. I didn't feel brave, exactly. Just tired of being afraid. I started documenting everything: dates, conversations, emails. Not because I planned to report him yet, but because I was finally acknowledging that what happened wasn't just emotional confusion. It was manipulation. Subtle, professional, dangerous. One day, I heard he was requesting to move departments around, reassigning staff. When my name came up in that conversation quietly, offhandedly, I knew what was happening. He was trying to reposition me, keep me close, or maybe isolate me again. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I requested a meeting with HR. I didn't go in with tears or drama. Just facts. Just patterns. Just the weight of months of silence pressing down on a table across from someone who finally listened. They took it seriously. Surprisingly seriously. An investigation was opened. Discreet. Professional. And from that moment on, the air in the office changed. I didn't know who knew or what rumors had started, but Daniel stopped speaking to me entirely. He avoided me the way a flame avoids water, carefully, purposefully. And in that space, I began to feel myself return. It wasn't justice. Not yet. Not fully. But it was something. And that something gave me room to breathe again. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt hollow, because part of me still remembered the version of him who made me feel seen, the version who knew I hated sparkling water, who remembered the purple pens, who asked about my fears. That version wasn't real, and letting go of him hurt more than anything else, because I had to admit that the connection I thought we had wasn't connection at all. It was power disguised as intimacy, and I fell for it. The investigation didn't lead to headlines. No firings. No lawsuits. Just a quiet reorganization. Daniel was moved to a strategic advisory role, the kind of title that sounds like a promotion, but feels like exile. He no longer attended team meetings. His office lights stayed off, and eventually, he disappeared altogether. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. People asked questions. They always do. I didn't answer any. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't owe the truth to anyone who hadn't lived it with me. HR thanked me for coming forward. I nodded, smiled. But inside, I felt small. Because what I did wasn't brave, it was necessary. And necessity isn't always glorious. Sometimes it's messy and lonely and quiet. Sometimes it leaves you shaking in the bathroom, wondering if it was all in your head. It wasn't. I know that now. Because I've spoken to other women from other companies, other cities, other industries, and their stories sound eerily like mine. Different names, different settings, same silences, same weight, same ache that starts in your chest and settles in your bones. We don't always recognize it at first. We call it flattery, admiration, attention. But the truth is, when power enters the room, everything changes. And if that power wants something from you, it doesn't always ask directly. Sometimes it waits, watches, presses against your comfort until it folds. But this isn't just his story. It's mine. And I'm taking it back. I've learned that healing doesn't come in a single moment. It comes in fragments, little decisions, small steps, long pauses. It comes when you sit with the discomfort and refuse to let it define you. It comes when you speak the truth, not because it will undo the past, but because it might protect someone else's future. I still walk past that restaurant sometimes. The one where we had dinner, the one where everything shifted. And every time I do, I feel the tension rise in my chest like a wave preparing to crash. But then I exhale and I keep walking, because that place that night, that version of me, it's behind me now. And what haunts me isn't what happened. It's how long I let it go unspoken. So I speak now, even if my voice trembles, even if no one's listening, because I am. And finally, that's enough.